A drawing tutorial, that's what I have for you today. Whether you're a beginner or an experienced artist, you may be making some of these basic mistakes. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle. On this channel you will find all things watercolour, a little bit of mixed media, drawing tutorials like this one, even some business and motivation stuff for artists too. Please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make at least one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday with extra content for Patreon subscribers. Now, a couple of months ago, I made a drawing mistakes video, top 10 drawing mistakes, and it went crazy. It went up like a rocket and everybody loved it, and I got lots of comments, and it made me realise just how much you like this kind of content. So, of course, I'm making another one. So this is Drawing Mistakes 2, Revenge of the Drawing Mistakes, Killer Drawing Mistakes, Drawing Mistakes Comeback, whatever you like to call it. This is the sequel, so I've got another 10 drawing mistakes for you. And just like last time, what I'm going to do is leave not the most important one, because we did that last time, and I will link to that video at the end if you haven't seen that one, so don't worry, you can watch these two independently. But I'm going to choose this sort of the most invasive one, the one that you've probably not even thought about. It's kind of quite all-encompassing, so I'm going to leave that one till last, so do make sure you watch the whole video, of course. And let's start with our first drawing mistake. So the first mistake I have for you today is drawing tops and bases of things out of alignment. Now, I see this most often with things like bottles and vases, as in vases of flowers in still lifes, but it can actually apply to anything. It's where the top doesn't align with the bottom. It can be something that you really don't notice very much, but it can just make your drawing look a little bit rubbish. Let me explain to you how to spot it and how to fix it. So let's have a look at this idea of things not lining up. So you can see how I've drawn a vase. Bearing in mind that things like vases, they're often handmade, so they won't be 100% symmetrical, but nevertheless the top and the base should line up. So if you think of the base here, in reality it's another ellipse. Now we can't see that ellipse unless it's, something like made of glass and it's transparent, but if it's not, we can't see that ellipse. But it'll be something like this. Now let's have a look at the idea of finding a center line here. So I could go from the base or I could go from the top. Doesn't make any difference, but I think the top is drawn more nicely. So let's find a place that's, about halfway. I'm going to take a set square now. It doesn't matter if you don't have a set square. You can just use anything that's been cut at a right angle, like a sheet of printer paper. Line it up with the edge of your paper and take a line down. Now, bearing in mind that at the beginning, it probably didn't look that bad, did it? It didn't look that much out of alignment. But when you look at this ellipse and this one down here, look how far off center this one is. Now, there's a simple way of sorting this out. So what we're going to do is take a measurement here to here. We can do this at any point further down as well. If we feel that, one side may be out of alignment with another side, or if it just doesn't look symmetrical, we can take a measurement at any point across. Now, this doesn't have to be, so many centimeters, half an inch, whatever. You don't have to actually measure an amount or a precise measurement. All you have to do, you can even get a piece of paper for this. Again, make sure it's been cut on a right angle, and you can make a mark. So let's go up the top here. We can take a line across as well. So a good way of sorting out an ellipse is to put a cross in the middle of it, and we can see if the ellipse itself is symmetrical, but in this case I'm just using it for the point of view of making a measurement. So I can go here like this and measure here. I can check this then against the other side. So looking down at the base, now the base ellipse could of course be wider or narrower, but it needs to be pretty much in alignment, and it needs to be the same both sides. So let's make it a little bit shorter this side. So let's make a mark here, and then let's get a piece of paper and we'll do this, and then we'll take it the other side. You can of course as well, if you want to really line it up, you can do a straight line as well. We'll take it the other side and then we'll put a mark here. So now we know that it's going to be centralized with that top one. As I said, it doesn't need to be the same width, but it does need to be central and roughly the same on each side, and then we can just start to even it up. So I can now draw base of my vase like this. Again, as I'm coming down here, I can sort of perhaps do this side first, as that seems to be the side that's the closest. You'll notice I'm not rubbing out the mistaken area first. I like to keep the mistakes in until after I've corrected it, just make things easier. One thing that I do want to do, I'm just going to take a measurement actually. Let's just take a measurement from here to here, just so that we get an idea of it being roughly the same size halfway down. So again, I can see that I need now to come out a little bit more here, and then I'm going to come round like this. So what I've done there is I've centralized everything and corrected my mistake, and now what I will do is I will remove the old lines. I can also remove all the guidelines. Now do bear in mind that I'm having to work a little bit heavier than usual here on YouTube, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see what I was doing, which is why those lines won't come out very easily. But if you are working yourself and you're working a lot lighter, then you'll find that you'll be able to erase those lines that were wrong and just keep the lines that are correct. I'm just going to check this again because it's not looking right now. Let's check this and check this. Just need to come out a little bit more there. I can just check this across here, and I see that this part here should be a little narrower. So at any part of this vase I can take a horizontal line across and I can check the measurements. I don't even need to use a ruler. I just need a piece of paper, and we can then even up our vase and get it looking symmetrical. At this stage in the video, as always, can I ask you please to click that like button if you're getting some value, some benefit from this video. Can you please click the thumbs up button for me? YouTube rewards channels with audience interaction, so if you like, share, subscribe, or leave me a nice comment, YouTube will push this video out to more people and I can help teach more people how to paint and draw. So our next mistake is a bit hard for me to explain. It's going to be much easier for me to show you than to explain, but it involves where you have a curved line that meets a straight edge. So this would be seen, for example, if you had a straight edged vase where you have the side of the vase coming down and where it intersects the curved line at the base. There's a big mistake that people make here, and that's to put a corner on when it should be a continuous curve. Let me show you how to improve this. So here I've drawn a mug, and you can see that this base ellipse, apart from the fact that it's not deep enough, and I've spoken about that in other videos, apart from that, if I were to extend the lines at the side here, rather than curving round, because as with the vase there's an invisible ellipse here that we can't see in the base. If I were to extend this line, do you see how it doesn't make a circle at all? It just goes off into the air. And one trick that will really help you when drawing things like vases and mugs and things like that is to have the line where the curve meets the straight edge as being imperceptible. There should never be a corner there because there are no corners on circles, and this circular ellipse at the base just continues on. So a really good way of doing it once you've sketched it in is just to make sure that there is no visible point where the outside line, the straight down line, becomes the curved round line. You want to make sure that there's no corner there at all, and then it starts to look much more realistic. This goes for landscapes as well, and anywhere that a curved edge intersects a straight edge and you know that it continues. So let's look at this little landscape I've drawn here. It's a sunny day, we've got sun in the sky there, and you can see I've got this path here, and we've got the straight line here, and this curved path just extends here. Now again, look at it at its logical conclusion. If I were to carry on these lines at the same angle, there we are, Pathway to the Sun. Isn't that a rock song? I can't remember. And look what happens when I take this curved line and I let it just join the horizon line without any perceptible end to the line. It now looks like this path just continues over the horizon. So anywhere that you have something curved that continues intersecting with something straight, you must make sure that you blend that line in and that it just naturally curves round, and that way you'll get a much more natural, realistic look, because a circle like this one here can't ever have a corner. Our next drawing mistake involves surface pattern. So this is where you have a pattern perhaps on a vase, could even be something like a piece of fabric or clothing, or even text on something. So where you have something that has a shape to it, in other words, it's not just flat like a sign, it's curved or indented or has some kind of surface shape and overall perspective. This is the mistake of making the things that go on the top, in other words, the surface decoration, the floral pattern, the letters, the wording, whatever it is. This is not allowing the surface decoration to follow the pattern of the object and doing it flat so that you're looking at two different planes. Once I explain it to you, it's going to be really easy to spot, and it's a great way of improving the three-dimensionality and the perspective on your drawings. So let's look at this idea of putting decoration or lettering onto curved surfaces. So I've drawn a little vase here, and I've drawn some, a flower decoration on it that was perhaps painted on it. However, I've drawn it completely flat. It doesn't follow the perspective of the vase, and that's going to give me problems in terms of realism. So when you're looking at a vase like this, what you'll have is you'll have lines of perspective like this, and they will actually be deeper here in this center line because this is closest towards us, and they will get narrower as they go up. So we can put lines in like this. You don't have to draw these perspective lines in, you just have to be aware of the way perspective works when you're putting things like lettering and flowers in. So therefore, if we have a flower in the center like this, if it has a circular middle, it's likely to have been stretched out like this, and the petals are likely to have been perhaps foreshortened a bit here, and they might be a little wider here. They might be following the curve of the vase a little more. If we have a leaf here, it's likely to be curving round, following that perspective. The same on the edge here, we're going around the curve, so we're going to find that that has squashed round there. These may come up and round, and this again may have been shortened. And we've got the stem here, and again, this is going to follow the lines of the vase. Now, you don't have to get this exactly right. It really isn't a scientific process. You just have to be aware that any pattern on a surface is going to be following the lines of perspective of the surface that it's on, and this will vary depending on where your viewpoint is. But can you see with that simple drawing how much more realistic and how much more curved this vase now looks than the one above? They were drawn exactly the same. The only difference is I allowed for the curve with putting the decoration on this one. On this one, I drew it completely flat. So let's look at the idea of text on an object, because text also follows these rules. So we've got here a nice little slogan, cats rule. Of course, cats are better than dogs. Everybody knows that. I'm only kidding. I love dogs too, but cats are a little bit better. And so when we put this writing in here, what we're going to do, see, this time I've drawn some lines of perspective, and they don't, as I said, they don't just go around evenly. They will get narrower as they get to the sides of the cup, and that's because this part here is closest to us, and therefore, because of foreshortening and things disappearing into perspective, it's going to change as it goes back. So let's look now at putting these letters on. Not only are they following the curve, but as they go out towards the side here, they're getting a little bit smaller. And actually putting the perspective on like this, putting perspective lines on, guidelines, can really help. So here you can see we've got our slogan. It's still great, but now it's actually going to look like it's following some perspective, some curves on the cup. Again, you're going to end up with a much more three-dimensional look to your drawing. So this next mistake also involves text, and this is text on flat objects. So sometimes you might have a sign, perhaps a shop front in your drawing, and you need to space the letters along. Have you ever started writing the letters and find that by the end you're sort of squashing everything together and it doesn't fit in? I'm going to show you how to easily work that out before you start, so this doesn't happen to you anymore. So the problem with putting text, especially if the words are quite long, the problem with putting text onto an area, so you may come across this when you're perhaps doing something like a road sign or a shop front. You have lettering and it fits in a certain area, and you start to write the letters and you just end up with everything bunching up over to one side. Now, it doesn't end up looking natural because, of course, the sign writer or the company that produced it will have spaced the letters evenly. So what do you do? Now, as someone who hates maths, nevertheless, I'm going to get you to do a little bit of maths. So what you want to do is you want to assign each of the letters one number, and you also want to make spaces in between. Now, you could add extra. If you wanted an extra space at each end, you could do that. But in this case, I'm just going to put one space in the middle and one space at each end. What you're looking for initially is to find the center point. And, you know, that may be as much as you need to do in order to get things right. It's going to be a big help. But what we do is we count. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So you're either obviously going to get an odd or an even number, and then you'll find that you've got something in the middle. So we've got 19, so we want to go down to 18, so we've got an even number, and then we've got 9 on each side and 1 in the middle. So if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on one side and 1 in the middle, that tells us that our second O is the one that goes in the center. Yes, I am using American spellings here. I've got so used to doing American spellings that I tend to just default to them. So we still don't quite know how big the letters are going to be. So we can just sketch one in there and just have a little think about that. So I'm not, committing to anything at this stage. So we've got 9 each side. So again, we can find the center point, and you'll notice I'm just doing this by eye. So we've got 9 each side. So that would be 4, 4 and 1 in the middle in order to get the 9 there. So we can think that I've got 4 and then 1 in the middle. So let's count this way. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 in the middle. That means our eye is going to go here. And we can do it the other side too. Go here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the E is going here. I would probably as well make some further guidelines here. So I'd put either a little line for them to sit on, or even a center line, but it does help to have a line to base them on, and possibly a line where you could say to yourself, well, they're not going to go any higher than this. And then I can start thinking about putting the other letters in. So I'm just going to make sure that everything fits in now. We've got our O, and then I want P, A, and then it's I, N, T, S. So I've worked it out roughly now. I've got rough sizes for doing it. And I'll be able to put those letters in and not end up, and I would be a little bit neater about getting the heights of these all correct and going exactly within those lines if I wanted to, but I'm just going to do it quickly now so that you can see the difference between one and the other, because we tend to overestimate the size of things like this, and we end up, as I said, we start here and we end up bunching them all up at the end. By doing this, first of all, you'll make sure that your letters are evenly spaced. So this next mistake is something that I see in botanical drawing a lot, and this is when you're drawing something like a flower and the petals just don't seem to come from the center. So it's really important to notice with these things that grow that everything comes from a center point. Let me explain to you how you can spot this mistake in your own work, how important it is, and how to make sure it doesn't happen to you anymore. So let's look at this little flower I've drawn here. Obviously it's only a cartoon sort of flower, but it doesn't look very realistic, and the reason is that I haven't taken care to line up the petals with the centre of the flower. Now, almost all plants like this grow from the centre out. There may be a slight gap, in other words, the back of the flower stem may go up and then around before it goes in. So you can sometimes have a stem that goes up and over to one side and then tips in, but it still needs to be realistic, and you need to be aware of these things. So let's look first of all at this stem, and let's just continue it on its current curve. Now, considering that the flower looks like it's facing that way, for this stem to go into the back of the flower, even if there was a bit of a curve before it went in, it would need to come further round here. Let's look at this petal here. Do you see this petal here? Let's take that to its natural conclusion and look at that. Again, the conclusion of this petal is nowhere near the centre of the flower. Some of them are a bit better. This one's not too bad, but it stops short. Look at this one here. Again, if I take it round, it's going to be in completely the wrong place. So you need to be always considering things need to go to the centre. And if you need to draw them up to the centre first and then rub out those lines later on, you can do that, that's fine. So you want to be making sure, of course, with these front petals, it's easy to make sure they go into the centre, but people still sometimes get this wrong. So you don't want to be thinking of each of these petals as just some separate thing that just sort of sits near the middle of the plant. Even if you cannot see the point where it meets the centre of the plant, as you wouldn't be able to with some of these back ones, you need to be aware of this. So sometimes what I do is actually take a petal out like this, and then I can just erase the lines that can't be seen. Of course, sometimes petals are a little bit transparent, you can see those lines, but you always want to be thinking about how things go to the centre of your plant, and in this way you'll get a much more realistic looking flower, and you can always just draw straight through things and then erase the bits that you don't need later on. And already you can see, even with this quick drawing, this little cartoony flower, it looks so much more realistic when we remember that everything has to come from the center point. So I've got a couple more drawing mistakes that I see now in face drawing, so we're going to go through a couple of those next. Do bear in mind that I have whole videos on this channel devoted to drawing faces, so do check out those as well. But one of the most common mistakes that I see, and people do this from childhood actually, I see this in children, I also see this in adults, and that's drawing the eyes too high in the head. Even experienced artists can be caught out with this one. Let me show you the right and the wrong way to position the features on the face. So I've started roughly sketching a face here. I think her name's Karen. This is Karen. Karen wants to speak to the manager, and she looks a bit scary, and one of the reasons is that her eyes are too high in her head. Now, apologies to anybody who is called Karen out there who's watching me. It must be extremely annoying for you all the time to have your name used like that. I actually get called Karen all the time in the YouTube comments, and it's not because of any complaining tendencies and wanting to speak to managers. It's simply because people mix me up with YouTuber Karen Rice because she has a very similar accent to mine, and that's not surprising because she comes from the exact same part of the country as me. I don't mean that I live close to her, I do not, but within regions she has had a similar life to me in that she, I believe, came from London and moved slightly out into East Anglia. So that's why she has a similar accent to me, and that's why sometimes people address me in the comments as Karen, because they're getting us mixed up. Now let's think about how proportions really work. Now you could see that I did this sort of egg shape here before I put the hair on, and there's the egg, and I've got another one here. Now, eyes in the human skull sit halfway up. So with somebody looking straight on at us like this and us being sort of level with their eye line, we can draw a center guideline like this and divide that egg shape in half. And that's where the eyes need to go. And again, you can divide this here into half. So from here to here in half, and from here to here in half, and there you've got your proportions a lot better. So let's redraw Karen, and we'll get her looking a little bit more realistic. Now, if you're saying to yourself, are there any exceptions to this rule? Yes, there are. And the exceptions to this rule would be when somebody's tipping their head up or down. Now, in order for Karen's eyes to be that high, she would need to be tipping her head right back, and all of these other proportions would go further up, and her face would become rounder and shorter as well. Now, I have other videos on how to draw faces and how to use these guidelines and how to adjust for people looking right, left, up or down, but you can see she already looks much nicer and much more realistic and much more chilled. She no longer wants to speak to the manager. She's going to go off and have a cup of coffee with her friends instead. So remember, if someone's looking straight at you, eyes halfway down the head. This next drawing mistake can actually be quite amusing, and it's not leaving enough room on the top of the head for somebody to wear a hat or even their own hairstyle. In other words, cropping everything so far in that they would have had to have the top of their skull removed. I see this all the time. So let me show you how it looks. I think once you spot it, you're going to spot it more and more often in your own work and in other people's work. It's one of those things that you don't kind of notice unless you're a bit more experienced, but it's going to make a big difference to the look of your portraits. So this is a problem that we find with hats and hair, and that's people just not leaving enough gap on the top of the head. So I've drawn this lady here. Now, do forgive me, this was not meant to be a portrait. I just wanted roughly the shape of someone's head, and somebody that was wearing some kind of, that had their hair shown, was also wearing a hat or some other kind of headdress. So this lady seemed perfect for me to show both of those things, but I was not taking a lot of care over the drawing or getting a likeness, so don't worry about that. But can you see what's happened here? Now, if we look at the actual shape of the skull, you know, her skull itself is probably about here. And she's looking over to one side, so it could even be a little bit bigger around that side because we have more room at the back of our head. So if the skull is here, what on earth is going on? We've almost had to give her this kind of lobotomy. We've almost had to chop her bone off in order to get this stuff on. And I see this mistake time and time again, people not leaving enough room. Even if you have dead straight hair like myself, there's still an amount that it comes out from the skull and that it sticks out. So you need to leave enough room for people's heads and not chop their scalp off. So let's have a look now. So let's draw the shape of the skull in, and we'll say that it's something like this. So from there, we need to give the hair enough room, and we need to give the headdress enough room, or the scarf. And we're going to bring it down like this and take it up as well. Again, this is just a rough drawing here. And we've got that line of twine that binds round there, and then it's going to come down the back here and come out. So again, I haven't been too accurate with this. I just want you to get an idea of how much room needs to be left on top of someone's head. You really can't keep chopping people's scalps off. It's not very nice for them. In fact, if this lady was walking around, she would in fact be dead. She would be a zombie, because this just physically isn't possible. So I want you to make sure that when you're drawing people, you are leaving enough room. Now remember what we said in the last thing, that the eyes are halfway down the head. If the eyes are halfway down the head, you then have to leave significant space for the skull and for any hair, headdress, anything at all. I've seen this done with, everybody from turban wearing Sikhs to English gentlemen with bowler hats. It doesn't seem to matter, the race or ethnicity. It doesn't matter the headgear or what they're wearing. It doesn't matter the hairstyle types, whether it's flat hair, whether it's a great big bunch of dreadlocks. People just keep doing this, keep chopping the top off people's heads. And I personally find it a little bit alarming. So let's be nice to people and let's allow them to keep the top of their skull. Another botanical mistake here, and this is about plant stems. I mean, it refers to other parts of plants as well, things like tree trunks, but most of all I see it in flower stems, and it's such a simple thing, and that is the simple truth that they mostly, there are one or two exceptions, but they mostly get thinner as they go upwards. As they grow up, they get more tapered, and I see people just not taking enough care over this. Let me show you how it's done. It's going to make your botanicals look a lot more alive. So look at this plant stem here. It's all over the place. It wiggles. It starts narrow, it goes wider, it goes in, it goes out, it ends up quite small. I see this so often with people doing botanical work. It's such a simple thing, and it's not anything that anybody actually has any trouble with drawing. It's just a matter of taking a little bit of care over it and understanding that this goes a long way to making your flower or your plant look realistic. So when you have something like a tulip like this, you generally want to start at the base and you want to come up heading towards the middle of that tulip, and you need to make sure that this stem gets narrower as it goes up, and you can exaggerate this a fair bit. It will always work for you. Now again, there are exceptions to this rule. If for instance a flower was curving directly towards you, if you had a vase of flowers and one in the middle was curving directly towards you, then it could have the opposite effect. It could be wider at the top, but that is actually very unusual. Most plants get narrower as they grow up like this, and that tends to go for everything, including leaves, and leaves getting smaller as they get towards the end. It happens with tree branches as well. The only time when this might not happen is with something like cacti, and to be honest, that really applies to the bits that grow out from them more than the central stem anyway. But almost everything that grows starts wider and gets narrower as it goes up. Just adjusting that carefully and just taking a little bit more care over your stems is going to give you a much better result. So we're going to talk next about the difference between drawing as an underdrawing for a painting and drawing as a tonal drawing to be a finished piece of work in its own right. There's a big difference to how you need to approach these. So let's look at the first mistake, and that is doing too much shading, too much sketching and too much heavy pencil under your watercolour paintings. So let's look at this idea of doing an underdrawing for a painting. You need to approach it completely differently to how you would be doing a drawing for a sketch. So this is what I often see beginners do. They've put an awful lot of pencil on, they've got very dark lines, they've probably pressed quite hard, dented the paper in places. They may have also ended up leaning across things and smudging everything. Now the graphite is not only going to block the watercolour, it's going to dull it down, and if there are any dents in the paper, then the paint is going to sink into them. So if you get to this point and you're looking at starting painting this, I can already see the paint is going across the top, but it's somewhat resistant. The other thing is that graphite can be water soluble, so it may smudge even further when you're putting the paint on top, and you just end up with a very mucky looking drawing. Now if you're a beginner and you're finding you have to do your drawing multiple times and you have to erase a lot, you're damaging the paper even further, what I suggest is that you draw your picture separately on a sketch pad. When you've got it right, you use some tracing paper to transfer it across. Now here I've shaded in areas that had some markings on. So this particular shell had some sort of red brownish markings on, and I've gone in there and I've done that with the pencil, and I just don't end up getting a very clean result. And I've also I've gone in, I've put some shadow down the base here, I've got some pebbles here. There's so much pencil on the pebbles, it'd be almost impossible for me to get a good result and get a good clean result on them. So here's the problem I've got when I put too much pencil on my paper. So if your drawing is going to be a watercolour painting, you need to apply the absolute minimum pencil, and I have even used far more here than I would like to. I have to draw a little bit darker so that you can see on YouTube, but really you want to have the absolute minimum amount of pencil, literally, so you can just about see what you're doing. You're going to have to try and remove that pencil at some point as well. It's going to be much easier to remove if you haven't pressed hard and if you haven't got a load of pencil blocking your lines. So we can go in then and we can put our dark areas on straight away with the paint. So when you're doing an underdrawing and you're going to paint, you do not need to put any shadow in whatsoever, and you never want to draw round a shadow either, because you'll find that those outlines end up staying even through the watercolor paint and it can look really uncomfortable. So here I am again with my seashell, not the most careful painting in the world, is it? And then we'll put a little bit of shadow underneath, and of course I would be letting all of these things dry in between if I were not filming for YouTube and trying to be quick. Now I haven't used the brightest of colors here, but I think you can see already how much fresher the paint looks here compared to here. So when you are drawing, not for drawing's sake, but when you are plotting out a painting, think of it as a map, and you only need so much information in a map. You don't need to know about every house along the route. You don't need to know about every train station if you're not catching a train that day. Only put as much information on your map as you need to proceed through your painting. So I asked you to watch until the end for the most invasive, most all-encompassing mistake that we have today, and that's not getting a full range of tonal contrast in your drawing. So now we're looking at drawings not as an underdrawing for a painting of any kind or any other piece of work. We're looking at drawings in their own right, tonal drawings. I'm talking about pencil drawings, charcoal drawings, anything like that. And the mistake that I see here is people just not using a full range of tones and having far too much white ending up on their paper. Imagine you were drawing a brown dog. What most people do, and this brown dog is going to have some black spots on it, what most people do is they draw the outline, perhaps a little bit of shading, and then they draw some dark spots on. In reality, there's no white on that dog. That dog is dark brown with darker spots. So you need to have some pencil right across the whole of the dog. So I'm going to show you how this works practically using a landscape photograph. I'm going to show you how to look out for this in your own work so that you can improve your drawings and get a full range of tones within your drawing, rather than just ending up with a white piece of paper with a few mid-range dark marks on. So I've got a little landscape here and I've transferred it onto my paper, and we're considering now tonal contrast. So this is a different type of drawing. So this time we're not drawing in order to do a painting, we're just sketching. So we want a full range of tonal contrast. So of course people end up and they get this sort of drawing like this, and they start, you know, shading various things in. So we'll go in and we'll shade some areas, and they'll end up, you know, perhaps drawing some leaves like this. And they may even, you see we've got some white paving slabs here. You know, you could shade in between them, which would be the realistic thing to do. Or, you know, some people would end up shading the paving slabs themselves. And there's just this sort of dotty approach, shall we say. And what you end up with is you end up with a piece of white paper with some dark marks on. So let's go a little bit darker here and take a bit more shading around here. Obviously I would be spending an extra 3 hours on this if I were doing it for real. Let's put some stuff in here, and you know, you'll end up with some leaves or something here, and there's a bit of a dark area here, isn't there? We've got trees as well, and people may take various approaches here. They may do the leaves light like this, or they may do some dark leaves like this, and you end up with this kind of spotty effect. And what you end up with really is a piece of white paper with some dark marks on it. Now after I printed this photograph, I then went and printed it in black and white. So I did this. I didn't adjust the light levels at all. I just kept this exactly as it is here. Now, one of the things you want to look at when you start a drawing is how much white is on there. And really, when we look at this, even these bits up here are light grey. The only areas that could be said to be white are these areas here. And even those, if we take something that's pure white, perhaps the edge of this writing pad, you can see they're not even pure white there either. So you want to be thinking about what is actually white. So we could consider that the slabs are white, and we could consider that these pieces of string are white, and possibly this area here. Be careful with this, because remember that photographs often wash out things like skies, so the sky may appear white and yet you know that it was a sunny day. It's very common for skies to overexpose in photographs if you're just taking snapshots on your phone. So When you've got something like this, what I'm trying to say to you is that almost all of this should end up with some pencil on, and you should be using a full range of tones. So you should end up going from the very lightest through and getting darker and darker and darker and darker and darker. You can see I'm using a fairly soft pencil here. This is a 3B. If you're using an HB, you won't even manage to get this amount of tones, and you should be able to take at least 10 gradations of colour. And when you finish your drawing, you should have all of those gradations within your drawing, and the only white areas that should be left are the areas that, if you looked at your picture tonally, would be white in the picture. Now, this does not mean that you always have to print your picture in black and white, but if you're not used to this, it can be a useful exercise. So if, for instance, you're doing a landscape and you're just leaving the sky white, ask yourself, is the sky actually white, or was it more likely a light blue? Would that shade, would that tone be darker or lighter than the grass that goes up to it? You want to be starting to look at all of these different nuances of tones, so that by the time you finish your drawing, you have a full range of tones, and there is no white on your paper except for areas that, if you looked at your picture tonally, would be white. And the other reason I say you don't always have to print out like this, you don't always have this option. The exact same thing happens with still lifes. You know, I see people time and time again, and they've got a light blue vase and they just outline the outside of it. If that vase is not white, there should be some shading over the entire vase, and you make it show up against the other objects that you're drawing by use of tonal contrast and by things around it perhaps being darker. So the moral of this story is, when you're doing a drawing, a tonal drawing, and you're just using pencil or just using charcoal, you want to look at the tonal contrast. You want to get a full range of tonal contrast, and there should be no white areas on your paper unless the object itself was actually white in real life. So do let me know in the comments which one of these drawing mistakes resonated with you, and if you learned something new today. If you need more help than a short video like this can give you, I actually am in the process of working up to building a drawing course, an online drawing course. I already have lots of online watercolour courses. You can have a look at those in the video description, but I also will have a drawing course coming up later this year. That's later in 2021. If you want to find out about that when it comes out, you need to go on my mailing list. The easiest way to get on my mailing list is to grab one of the free PDFs that I have in the video description for you. You can grab one of those for no money whatsoever, little help and advice for your watercolour painting and some other areas of your artistic practice too. So do grab one of those before you leave this video. If you found this video useful but you haven't seen my previous video on 10 drawing mistakes yet, you can watch that video right now.